Good morning, everybody. Got a fairly, I wouldn't say it's a full agenda, but we have some items that will take some time towards the end that staff will get into. As always, your per diem form should be submitted. You know, from a housekeeping perspective, which way to go find the bathroom, if you need a bathroom. We're just going to work through the agenda. No plans to take breaks at this point in time. So if you do need to take a break, feel free to step away from the table. And with that little bit of housekeeping, I do want to take the time to introduce the new executive director. I will say hello and have Commissioner Beal actually introduce the new executive director. Welcome aboard, Steve. And Commissioner, would you like to say a couple things?
Sure. Well, welcome, Steve, to your second day on the job. I asked him earlier if he has any regrets yet. He said no. That's good.
We'll see when we get to the end of the day.
No, but Steve is no stranger to LMF. He's actually been working in state government most recently in the beginning of Habitat program. So I did share my apologies with Commissioner Camuso for poaching one of her great staff people. We try not to do that to each other, but it happens sometimes. But we're just really pleased to have you here in the program and also in our department. And I know you've met some of the board members in the room this morning. Hopefully you'll get a chance before too long to meet those who are on the Zoom call here, or Teams call, but we're really happy to have you aboard.
Thank you, Commissioner Beal. Thank you, Commissioner Kelleher. I'm thrilled to be here. And I got to say, you know, over the past 24 hours more, before I started, I met with the LMF staff, Laura, Flora, and Jason, and they've just been so incredibly welcoming. And I just feel so privileged to work with such professionals. And I really want to thank Laura for her role as acting director. And I'm bringing me up to speed gradually here. It's just been fantastic. I've never felt more welcome in a new position. So I just want to thank you guys. And again, thank you, Commissioner.
I do want to echo Steve's thanks for Laura. Laura, you jumped in. The transition's been seamless. Had to bring us through a meeting. Let's do a quick round of introductions, both in the room and virtually, and then we will jump right into the agenda. So I will begin. Pat Kelleher, Commissioner of DMR.
Amanda Beal, Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry.
Bethany Atkins, sitting in for Judy Camuso from the Department of Land, Fisheries and Wildlife.
Roger Burley, public member, Cliff Island. Jim Norris, public member from Winthrop.
Barbara Trapton, public member from Brunswick.
Bob Myers, public member from Bath.
Great. Why don't we go to online? Start you, Catherine.
Good morning. Catherine Robbins Halstead, public member, Searsmont.
And Mac Hunter, public member, usually Amherst, currently Flagstaff, Arizona.
We heard you were going to be in the bottom of the Grand Canyon, Max, or you either have really good service at the bottom of the canyon or.
No, we leave at dawn tomorrow for the canyon.
Okay, great. Why don't we just quickly do staff and those in the room as well. So start Jason.
Jason Delay, LMF Senior Planner.
Lori Drury, LMF Senior Planner.
Laura Graham, LMF Senior Planner.
Matt Rosenblatt. I work at Farrell Rosenblatt and Russell in Bangor. I'm a lawyer who represents LMF in several transactions.
Joe Anderson with the Bureau of Parks and Lands.
Over here.
Hi, Brianna Parisian, Brylove staff.
Yep.
David Miller, Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust. Dick Spencer. I'm an attorney at Drummond Woodsum, and years ago co-founded Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust.
I'm Jennifer Melville. I'm a consultant working with the Open Space Institute and LMF.
And a familiar face.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, there's a blue Volkswagen with a loon plate in the upper lot with its lights on. So if that's anybody's here, take care of it. I'm Ed Meadows. I'm a retired conservationist, and I was on the original Land for Maine's Future Board.
Right. Welcome. It's good to see you, Ed. Okay, let's get right into the agenda. We have, the minutes from the May 16th and May 18th meeting that we need to, have accepted into the record. So, Roger.
I will move acceptance, but I will also offer a couple of corrections. I've taken my share of minutes over the decades and lots of mistakes. Typos don't matter so much, but I think when we're talking about money here, there's a couple of places where some zeros and some commas are misplaced. Status of funds. Top line, 30,0,0,0. So, and then over on the Reed Deadwater, you've got again, maybe a zero missing. At the end, so page 2, right,
Page 2.
right, second page, so on your left, right there. Right,
Yes. Yeah.
and then on the next page, over in about 1/3 of the way down. There's a 4900. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
different in 2 places.
Yeah, we're missing a 0. Okay.
So with those corrections, if that's the right term, I believe so.
We have a motion, with some amendments, seconded by Bob Myers. Any other comments on the agenda? Did staff get those corrections? Doesn't see in the head nod. Anybody online? Not seeing anybody online. All those in, well, are there any objections to the acceptance of the minutes as amended? Seeing no objections, the minutes are passed and are part of the record. Thank you very much. Thanks for the corrections, Roger. Moving right
I
along.
wanted to prove that I've read.
You did well. I mean, those are the type of numbers that I just like skim over and that would never have caught a comma. So, moving right along to item number 3, fund balances. Laura, are you going to go through those?
I'm gonna try. Get back.
Have a backup.
So starting up at the upper, what is that, right? And we have 2009 monies left in a few categories: conservation and recreation, farmland preservation, a small amount, $1,797. Farmland preservation, again, $2,009. We've got $153,095, which offers some potential for one of the projects we're going to be discussing later in the agenda. 2011 working waterfront funds still holding at $360,273. And below that, coming into more modern times, 2021 funding in conservation and recreation, $27,399,500 available. The other funds, working waterfront, $4 million, farmland projects fund, $4 million, water access project funds, $2 million. So available right now is that $37,914,000 plus the balances from up above.
Sorry.
No, why don't we go right into the allocation and status as well, and then we can take questions on all of them.
Sure. So current allocations right here, conservation and recreation, $15,469,672. Working waterfront, 5 active projects at $1,383,750. Working farmland, also 3 active projects, allocation of $629,500. Water access, 1 project allocated at $37,500. So total allocations, you can see right there, $17,524,22.
Any questions to the board on fund balances or project allocation?
So does anyone have the quick numbers about what hasn't been allocated and what remains?
Yes, and you'll see that on the next slide.
Slide.
Next slide. Okay, there you go. And then beyond that. Yes. Yes.
So here you go, Barbara, right here, bottom unallocated funds available, $7,618,248. That's what we have on the table today.
And that's great project fund availability. The set asides are already removed from that number.
Yes. How did I do, Laura? All right.
Excellent.
Thank you.
You had the comments in the right spot.
Yeah. That's Laura's mark.
Well.
There actually is a misplaced comma on
The top one.
Really,
Nope. Well, that- yeah.
Oh, no, there's an extra 0 in the 30 on the top is what it is. No, there's an extra, no, there's missing a 0. Oh, there's missing, yeah. I'm
All
sorry.
right, any questions on balances, allocation, status? Seeing none? Okay, let's move right along through the agenda then. On item number 5, projects to be acted upon, we have Big Sands, Johnson Brook, Eastern Trail, and Kennebago Headwaters. So let's start off with Big Sands.
You want to look at the round 11B, Commissioner Kelleher?
I want to look
There's a
at
quick slide there, right up on the screen.
the project information.
We're not going to look at them in detail, just this was an overview.
Okay.
Well, there they are.
Yeah.
All right, we didn't talk about this part.
I jumped ahead of you.
No, it's
Jumped ahead of staff. My apologies.
Steve, I don't know if you want to speak to this or we didn't talk about this.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Laura, please.
And Jason and Flora, feel free. As you can see, we have 6 working community forest projects. Working forest / community forest projects is how these are styled, and 6 new working farmland project inquiries. Full proposals are due August 4th. So you'll see this is what you've got coming at you at the September meeting. That's good. Anyway.
So we have more funds and projects.
Yes, and that's what that 7, exactly. Yeah, move on. Yeah, sure.
That's a great.
Sorry, thank you.
Okay.
And now, Big Sand Beach.
Talk about Big Sand now. You want to pull up another slide or?
Soft shoe.
All right, so Big Sand Beach is a water access project on Sislodopsis Lake in Washington County. And this project was originally, they submitted an inquiry for the round 11A last winter. After talking over with staff, we all decided it made more sense for them to submit it as a water access project because that's really what the project is about. And also water access pulls from a different pool of money where they're not competing for those limited CNR funds. So this is a just shy of 18 acres on the south end of Sislodopsis. You can see the other Sislodopsis project that we did a couple of years ago is sort of half cut off by the little inset on the top left there. So other end of the lake, surrounded on all sides by the Down East Lakes Community Forest. And this property is actually owned by the brother of one Jim Norris. So Jim, and staff have talked it over, and Jim's going to recuse himself from this discussion. So this project, as you saw on the first slide, is used by people in the area as a swimming beach, hand carry boat launch, and landing for people who are out on the water. There's some potential for development of a trailer boat launch. I don't know how much that has been scoped out. We have Nicole Nagrin from the Down East Lakes Land Trust is here with for any project questions. But essentially it is a, locally used water access site and a site landing spot that's accessed from the water that we have the opportunity to fund here. And again, this would be funded out of water access money, which we have this 2 million of our 40 million, 2 million is set aside for water access and none of that has been allocated yet. So, and there's a summary that went out with the board packet and as well as the proposal that you all received. So they're requesting $100,000 from LMF towards a total project cost of $300,000. And there's a draft motion right there for your consideration.
Great. Any questions about the project from the board?
If there is the potential for a trailer boat access, is that at the same location as the current hand carry access, or would that be at a different location?
it would all be on this parcel, but I couldn't speak. I don't know, like I said, I don't know how much it's been scoped out as far as where it is. The water is obviously fairly shallow there, so I don't know what the feasibility is. Nicole, do you have any insight?
We have not done work in terms of getting like a design drafted or trying to get a contractor lined up or anything like that. But in terms of the location, it would be in the exact same location as the current hand carry access is.
And is there a great demand for a trailered access?
Not for deep water. It would be for small, very small craft. The local guides in the area say probably nothing bigger than like motorized canoes, like the traditional Grand Lakers that they love to use.
Could I ask what's the closest existing boat launch?
The existing boat launch would be on the north end of the lake. I think it's about half an hour on bad roads, as I understand it, to get from one to the other. And depending on which, I think if you're coming from the east, this is much more accessible. Whereas to get to the north end, it's easier if you're coming from the west, from Lincoln area.
Any other questions from the board? Would anybody like to move this question a little bit? Well, we got, we'll go with Barbara. Are you, yep,
I'm right with her.
okay.
I move that we accept the Big Sand Beach water access proposal as a finalist with a preliminary allocation of $100,000 subject to standard LMF conditions.
Second. Motion by Barbara, seconded by Roger. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, is there any opposition either in the room or online to the motion? Seeing no opposition to the motion carries. Thank you. That's great. Congratulations on the allocation to get the project moved. So let's move right on to the next one, which is Johnson's Brook.
Yep, and actually this one is going to be pushed to September. I just late yesterday, I got the applicant got in touch with me. They had a late meeting with the seller. They are not on the same page as far as the access that's going to be conveyed over the retained lands of the seller.
Okay.
And because they don't at this point, they don't know what they're buying. They don't know if their appraisal is correct. So we're gonna table this until September.
Okay, great. That's the case. Let's move down the list to, is it New Leaf next?
Yep, New Leaf Farm came in last summer as one of our working farm projects. And it's a 74-acre farm in Durham. About a third of that is open fields. The rest is woodlot. The history of the diversified vegetable farm, it's in hay right now. I think everybody wants to see it returned to more intensive use if that can be arranged. The project is so the project overall is going to include an option to purchase at agricultural value, but we are not going to apply any of the working farmland funding to that provision, because the AG's office has some threshold questions about the how those provisions function under existing Maine law that we haven't answered. So just to keep this moving forward, we are funding this as if it is a conservation and agricultural conservation easement with no OPAV provision, but the final document will include that provision. So we have an appraised value of $265,000, which the AOC accepted, and a draft motion there for your consideration. And that is the value without the OPAV included.
I'll look to the chair to committee motion.
I move to approve the recommendation of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee and accept the appraiser's value of $265,000.
Committee motion does not need a second. Is there any conversations or comments on the motion? Being none in the room or online, is there any opposition to the motion? Seeing no opposition, the motion passes. Great, thank you. And so move on to the second half of this.
Yep. Public notice was posted in the KJ and the Press Herald on June 17th. No comments received, and the second draft motion there.
I move we confirm the allocation of $132,500 in working farmland access and protection funding to support the acquisition, subject to standard conditions.
Second.
Motion by Barbara, seconded by Roger. So question to staff, just to back what you said earlier. So during the due diligence, we'll rectify this question that the Attorney General's brought up.
We've at the AG's office has asked the Council for Maine Farmland Trust to weigh in on some of those questions.
Okay.
We haven't received a response on that. The way we've set it up, we can proceed without those questions being answered.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's likely to happen.
Okay. Any questions on the motion? Any comments on the project at all? Did I see a hand in the back of the room? I'll take one quick public comment.
Thank you very much. Just a clarification, the agenda that I printed off the LMF website says allocation of CNR funds.
So it does. The agenda was printed incorrectly.
Talk about all of this after the meeting. We're off.
We're in transition.
Exactly. Okay, thank you for that. Any additional comments from the board, either online or in the room? Seeing none, is there any opposition? Seeing no opposition, the motion passes. Thank you very much. Moving right along from New Leaf to Jockey Cat.
Jockey Cap, yes, this is right downtown Freiburg in Oxford County. This is a relatively small acquisition. It's 15.6 acre fee acquisition. It's 50% of the undivided interest of the fee. This is one of those where the town already owns a 50% undivided interest, and the Upper Saco Valley Land Trust is conveying the remaining 50% of the interest to the town. This is right downtown, as we say, very panoramic views, as you can see. It's used a lot, and it is adjacent as well to the Malliacket Middle School and Freiburg Academy. So it's a hugely important outdoor learning space as well. And here you can see just how downtown it is. It's right downtown, so accessibility is not an issue. And the Appraisal Oversight Committee met on June 6th. To discuss the Jockey Cap appraisal. The appraisal reported a value of $185,000 and the committee accepted the appraised value. So we prepared a draft motion for the Appraisal Oversight Committee.
I move to approve the recommendation of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee and accept the appraiser's value of $185,000.
The motion does not need a second. Is there any comments or questions on you? You're not conflicted on this one, so we'll let you.
Just so everybody realizes that the AOC does its work and thoroughly does it, that we did raise some questions to the trust and the appraiser and got satisfactory responses, especially regarding the 50% interest that how it was dealt with. So system worked well.
Thanks for that. Any additional questions or comments? None online. Any opposition in the room or online? Seeing no opposition, the motion passes.
And we ran the announcement for public notice in the Kennebec Journal and the Portland Press on June 17th, and we did not receive any comments. So we prepared a draft motion number 2 for the board.
I'd like to make a motion on this one, Jim?
Yes, I move to confirm the allocation of $92,500 in conservation and recreation funding to support the acquisition, subject to standing conditions.
Motion by Jim, seconded by Roger. Any additional questions or comments on the motion or on the project? Down in the room or online, is there any opposition in the room or online? Seeing none, the motion passes. Great, thank you very much. And so now moving right along to item E on the agenda, Staples Woodland. Laura.
The last project to be acted on today is Staples Woodlands in Oxford, Oxford County. This project is about 83.5 acres to be acquired by Western Foothills Land Trust. It has over 1,100 feet of Little Androscoggin River frontage. It's near the Oxford Elementary School in downtown Oxford and Oxford Town Hall. It has existing snowmobile trails, both ITS 89 and local trails, and the plans are to have trails for hiking, snowshoeing, horseback riding, and cross-country skiing on the property. So the Appraisal Oversight Committee met on May 26th of this year to discuss the Staples Woodlands appraisal. The appraisal reported a value of $170,000, and the committee accepted the appraised value. And a draft motion there for Mr. Myers.
I move to approve the recommendation of the LMF Appraisal Oversight Committee and accept the appraiser's value of $170,000.
The motion does not need a second. Is there any questions or comments on the motion? Seeing none in the room, is there any objections? Line or in the room? Seeing none, the motion passes. Right? Second half?
Public notice for the Staples Woodlands project was advertised in the Kennebec Journal and the Lewiston Sun Journal on June 17th. No comments were received. And draft motion number 2.
Robert.
I move we confirm the allocation of $83,000 in LMF conservation and recreational funding to support the acquisition, subject to standard conditions.
Second.
Motion by Barbara, seconded by Roger. Any questions or comments on the project related to the motion? Seeing no questions or comments, is there any objections to the motion? Online or in the room? Seeing no objections, the motion passes. Great, thank you very much. Got a couple other items under 5, which Eastern Trail and Kennebago Headwaters left. Jason?
Yep. Eastern Trail and Cottontails was one of the round 11 projects that was selected as a finalist. This is hopefully just a housekeeping thing. The proposal included match parcels that had been required more than 2 years ago. The LMF, according to the LMF workbook, what we counted as match is the value of lands acquired within 2 years of the date of the proposal. The applicant in their presentation requested a waiver of the 2-year limit, but in selecting this as a finalist, the board didn't specifically address that that request and the eligibility of these 2 match parcels. So I wanted to bring that back in front of the board and confirm the understanding that, or confirm whether the acceptance as a finalist included the acceptance of the proposed match.
Sorry, Jay, say that again. So the value of the land, so that it's a 2-year process.
So this is a project where the matching fund, the match for the LMF award will be the value of the previously acquired parcels. According to our workbook, those have to be parcels that were acquired within the previous 2 years. They were acquired more than 2 years ago. So I think we just need a confirmation from the board that the board is going to accept those as match for the award.
Robert.
And Jason, I assume the 2 years is to ensure that the value is somewhat stable as the match. But in this case, because values have gone up so much, there should be no question about the value of these parcels.
I honestly don't have any insight into the risks of that requirement.
It might be that, but it might be a concern about, just funding pre-acquisitions that were already taken care of. I don't really know what the policy idea is behind it.
Yeah, it seems that, I know in other work that I've been involved with, that it could have been zoning changes, some sort of change in statutory local activity that could affect the value. And most of the time, the original appraisal will give an opine regarding, nothing's changed.
I think in this case, because it's been a few years, they're going to get a new appraisal on the match parcel, so there's no question about value.
If that is the case, that certainly gives me comfort, to allow that to go forward and accept that. Any other thoughts, Barbara?
Well, just to that point, again, I assume if we waive it and somehow the appraisal is not satisfactory, because we won't see that appraisal, but the staff will.
Mm.
The AOC won't see that.
We're planning to bring it to the
Yeah,
AFC.
we've been,
If they're getting cash back out.
I think our practice has been more recently to share the match appraisals with the AOC as well, when that is the real match for the LMF award.
So with that in mind, it's the fact that the staff will get that appraisal, they'll share it with the AOC. I certainly don't have an issue, waiving the 2 years, knowing that we're gonna, if there is a problem, we'll have another bite at the apple. Board comfortable? I think we can, through consensus, we can just show through consensus, the board, approves this, and have it be reflected in the minutes. Perfect. Okay.
This is a little Maine won't wait blurb, and the reason you're seeing this here is because of the project you are going to consider has a title problem that we think you will see a lot if we do things in this part of the state, imperfect access. And so this is not by any stretch of the imagination intended to influence what you decide about this particular project. This is meant as context, purely context, and to remind us all of our larger goals. So with that, we've merged the action items with the strategies and the outcomes to see our primary charge. Next slide. And then the purpose is to obviously to protect working lands and natural lands, to maximize carbon storage and protect working farms and protect working farms and forests and make sure they stay in place. And of course, in Maine Won't Wait, a big part of what we do is the underpinning for all the other things that flow from Maine Won't Wait: a better green economy, more carbon sequestration. There we go, right here. Yep. And then finally, the overarching goal is to that 30 by 30. That's not us all by ourselves, of course. That's in concert with every other conservation group. And we are to focus our conservation efforts on high biodiversity areas. And here's our progress so far. And again, we have to conserve quite a few more, but not all by ourselves. And the underlying anxiety on my part, the reason you're seeing this now, is that my personal number one anxiety is that whatever comes out of this discussion with Kennebago, that hopefully it is not a categorical, we refuse to look at anything that is other than perfect. Hopefully that you really do hold on to your discretionary authority the statute gives you. Otherwise, we won't be able to participate in a lot of these kinds of working forest lands. Jason is going to ground you very nicely in the particulars of the project and in the statutory underpinnings for your authority. So, thank you. Yes.
We'll let the perfect get in the way of the good.
Yes, and because if we do, we will be out of that game. There'll be huge acres we can't touch. Again, nothing to do with what you decide in this particular case. That's your discretion. Just encouraging you to hold on to what authority the legislature has given you. Thank you, Roger. You said it like this.
Okay, so Kennebago Headwaters and Kennebago Woodlands. The Kennebago Headwaters project is a Round 10A project. That is about 1,700 acres and has a confirmed final award of $1 million. Kennebago Woodlands, right next door to it, was a Round 10C project, 5,000 acres, has a preliminary allocation of 750,000. The access issues that we're going to talk about apply to both of those. The board is not actually obligated to take the same action with regard to both parcels, but it obviously makes sense to discuss them together. In the course of due diligence, we found out that the projects don't have a documented right of public access, which is what the LMF standard conditions require. So we are having this discussion. So what we have, the actual access to these parcels, there are two roads right now that are not gated. They are usable by passenger vehicles, by which the public accesses this property. So we're not talking about a property that the public, where there is no public access. We're just talking about whether that access is legally guaranteed. From the southwest, that's probably the most used access. That's Lincoln Pond Road. There are no deeded rights but that is a management road that the public uses to access this property. From the east is Tim Pond Road. That is the deeded access that Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust has. And over the green portion of that, they've also secured guaranteed documented public access. The yellow portion is not, again, open to the public currently, but that's not guaranteed. There's also sometimes been discussed the use of Kennebago River Road, also called Grants Camps Road, to reach the property from the south. That one is gated. Functionally, there is no public access on that road, but because it shows up on maps, and it's actually how Google sends you there, I put it on this map just so that we're all on the same page. So that's what's there now. And because Tim Pond Road is Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust access, that's what most of the discussion has been around. In your board packet is a memo from Dick Spencer on behalf of Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust, opining that the trust has the legal right to permit the public to use the Tim Pond Road to access this property. The advice that we've gotten from our attorney is that that's not settled, and basically until a court makes that determination. And so there's no guaranteed public right of access. And that is, we functionally can't know what a court would decide. And it's not the role of this board to try to, act in a judicial or quasi-judicial role and weigh the arguments on the merits and reach a conclusion about whether there is legal access over this road or not. So the way LMF has handled this in the past, in our workbook, it requires that all lands acquired with conservation recreation. Oh no.
Oh my.
Close one.
It's just a hazing effort there, Steve.
So in the workbook, there's a requirement that all lands acquired with conservation recreation funding be open to the public. The way that's been applied is that standard condition that there be both legal and physical access to the property. But there have also been projects in the past where there is not guaranteed public access. Access is on management roads like this, or by water over rivers or lakes, or some combination of the two. Also projects where maybe there is a public road that passes through a corner of the property, but the way that people get there in practice is a privately managed road. There have also been projects where LMF has decided not to fund projects because of the condition of the public access. This is really a case-by-case decision that the board has made, knowing what we know about access. Is this a good use of public funds? In statute, public access is mentioned in a few places. The sort of baseline, set in stone requirement is the hunting, fishing, trapping, and public access may not be prohibited. The property cannot be posted. The board is also instructed whenever possible and appropriate to acquire guaranteed public vehicular access as part of the acquisition. In the statute that instructs the board to provide a biennial report to the legislature, the board is also instructed to explain why guaranteed vehicular access was not acquired whenever it is not acquired. But implicit in that is that the board has the discretion to fund a project where it is not acquired, where there is no guaranteed public access. Again, there is not a hard and fast rule. As Laura says, adopting a hard and fast rule on this and giving up that discretion would really limit the board's ability to participate in conservation projects in large parts of the state, which obviously, those projects have a lot of benefits. By the same token, funding every project that didn't have guaranteed public access would run the risk of a lot of public money being invested in projects that the public couldn't get to. This is absolutely just a case-by-case decision that the board makes at its discretion. And I wish I had a great guiding principle to give you, but I don't. I do have a few different things that the board could consider in making this decision. This is not an exhaustive list, but we could look at the purposes of funding. Is this a project that was presented to the board as a recreation opportunity, or is it presented as a habitat conservation? The significance, how significant is this project? How significant are the benefits that aren't connected to public access? Is this providing tremendous habitat benefits, carbon sequestration, biodiversity, all those benefits that would continue to exist if the public access were lost? Other thing the board can consider is the current status of public access. Can the public get there? Do people use it? And what is the risk from a practical standpoint, not a legal standpoint, but a practical standpoint, that risk going away in the future? By which I mean, essentially, how likely is it that somebody's going to put up a gate? The board is not charged with trying to analyze the terms of the easement and the history of use and decide what a court might do if somebody tried to put up a gate. And even if the board undertook that, it wouldn't hold any water when a court did take it up. They're going to do what they're going to do. But the board, I think it makes sense for the board to look at how likely are we to be in that position? How likely is it that the public will continue to be able to access this property going forward? And also, the last thing the board might look at is the position of the sponsoring state agency and how they feel about sponsoring the project with the access in its current condition. So those are some of the things that the board might take under consideration in making that case-by-case determination. Staff also lost it.
Just a little lag.
All right. Staff also talked about some ways that if the board did decide to fund this project, the public investment could be protected. The first two of these are relatively straightforward. To put language in the project agreement requiring Ranger Lakes Heritage Trust to defend that public right of access. And also language in the project agreement establishing that members of the public are invitees of Ranger Lakes Heritage Trust, which may strengthen the argument that the trust is making, if it does end up in court, defending this public access. Those I think are straightforward, and we would want to do those unless some compelling reason not to. The third one on here, requiring repayment of LMF funds if the public access goes away. That is something that would only be included if the board chose to make that a condition of funding, because the board could also decide, we think the public benefits of this are important enough that we are happy having that public money invested in this property regardless. Or the board could put that condition that if the public access is lost, the funds be returned to LMF. So that is the situation we are in. And I do have some draft motions here, but I expect there'll be a lengthy conversation before we get to those.
You go back to the slide of the project map itself with the roads.
Maybe. Come on, slides.
Yeah, you're going too fast in the other direction now.
Oh, it's lagging.
I know.
Yeah.
There, one more.
Um,
There.
All right. It'll come up in a minute, we think.
Um,
How?
Oh, there it is. There it is.
I just want to make sure I've got my bearings right. Are we talking about, we're talking about the blue box? That's Little Kennebago?
Yes, it is.
And so the Tim Pond Road, and the road that's coming back from the west, which are fairly major haul roads through those areas. None of them are currently gated. Public is accessing those areas to hunt and fish and recreate now. I'll be curious to hear a little bit more about the deeded access coming in or the access from the Tim Pond Road, related to the trust. To me, this is a fairly valuable project. I'd like to try to find a way to resolve this issue. I think that being said, I am and have been in the past a stickler about public access into projects. What did I tell you, Laura, about public access? What was my
Oh,
quote?
something about a Tesla, as I recall.
Exactly. I mean, public access for me is not being able to drive a Tesla to these places, right? I mean, it's to be able to access them over maybe unimproved roads, but you can still get there. There's not a gate. And this is a heavily gated area of the state. Knowing, because I've got several really good bird covers over there that are behind gates, so it's hard to go for long walks, but the bird hunting is good because of it. Mac, I see your hands up. I'm just rambling at this point in time. There's gotta be a resolution here somehow.
Yeah, as I think Jason said, the primary access to this area is by the Lincoln Pond Road. I was up it a couple times myself last year. And I note that is held by the Pingree heirs with a trust with a easement with New England Forestry Foundation. Does that easement guarantee public access across the Pingree lands?
If I understand, you were breaking up a little bit there, Mac. As I understand the question was whether the Pingree easement would have the effect of guaranteeing public access across that road. My understanding is the easement, as one of the purposes of the easement is to provide public recreational access, but that does not extend to a guarantee of public access across this road through the easement to these parcels. So that doesn't get us to that point of having that guaranteed public access.
Okay, thank you.
Bethany?
So following up on that a little bit, it seems like a lot of the discussion about resolving the public access, legal public access has been across Tim Pond Road. Have there been any efforts to secure legal access along the Lincoln Pond Road?
So we had that conversation with the trust, and the feedback we got was that trying to get deeded public access from the Pingree family is just a non-starter.
One of them is on our board.
Yeah.
And has there been, what's the conversations been with our AAG on this particular issue, or have you had those
We
conversations?
haven't gone to the AAG level. We've had the conversations with Nat, who is our attorney for this project.
Yeah.
And that's essentially how we got to this point. But we haven't had any discussions with the AAG. What question, what input would you be looking for from the AAG?
I mean, you've gone through what I would have looked at, which is the statutes, the underlying statutes, which I agree are not definitive in this particular instance. We have a policies through standards and, their standard and conditions, which lean heavily in the direction of allowing or making sure that there is public access. So I'm not sure what the question would be, but I just, if they had, looking through their legal eyes, but
I guess the conclusion that we got to, that the board does have the discretion to proceed, was set based on looking at what we've done in the past and staff's interpretation of the statutes. It's not a directive we got from the AG.
A couple instances in the not too distant past where we denied a project over in the far western corner of the state on the end of the Golden Road, which was a big sugar bush plantation, because of lack of access unless you want to go through Canada. And then we also had another one in around the Kennebec, the CAD 9 Works region, where we had to resolve some questions, but I think we resolved those satisfactorily. Bob, do you remember those?
Yeah, finally.
Finally, but it took a while.
Yeah, it did.
But it was deeded, if I recall, it was deeded access to those roads to provide access.
Like I said, I found, looking through older projects, a number of projects where the access was on management roads like this, where the owner undoubtedly had legal access to the property,
Right.
but there was no guarantee of public access. I think going back a ways, Namakanta.
Yeah.
But more recently, the most recent one I found with this really no guaranteed public access was Moose River number 5 bog, which was 10 or 12 years ago, I think. That one, the vehicular access that BPL bought the property, but and BPL's vehicular access ended at the other side of the Moose River. But I think with the right to build a bridge. But the access was obviously along the Moose River by canoe. So the board has done this before.
And then Jim.
I wonder if I might direct a question to Nat, because there would seem to be a legal option here to determine whether the arguments presented by Attorney Spencer would hold weight in a declaratory judgment. And is that, I feel a need to explore every avenue as a member of the LMF board to get legal access. And is that an avenue that you could see having the applicant pursue?
I could see on paper and in theory that remedy is available, going to the court and asking the court to determine the extent of the easement rights would be over the yellow portion to the right in Eustis, the extent of those easement rights and the scope of those easement rights. The problem is, like a lot of other sort of theoretical remedies, the practical import of that is pretty harsh in that it would take a long time. It means bringing a lawsuit against the owners of the property. Those are expensive and time consuming, and of course the outcome is not certain. And as a practical path forward, there'd be some impediments to that. I mean, so the legal remedy is there, but recourse to the court system, and our court system at the moment is very badly backed up, as you know. So having a timely decision wouldn't be likely. In addition, the way these are analyzed, the way access easements are analyzed in the case law often requires a trial where there's evidence of, for example, uses that were going on contemporaneously or around the time that the easement was granted. And so it's not simply done based on the language in the deed. There can be a lot of extrinsic evidence that gets involved, and a full-blown trial proceeding is possible. So again, it makes that remedy, even though it exists, it makes it difficult to achieve as a practical matter. That's the best answer I think I can give.
follow-up. I have two follow-ups. I'm assuming if this was initiated and it became too complex, you can always withdraw your request for a declaratory judgment. Is that correct?
Well, a declaratory judgment action is a lawsuit that you start in court. And that someone would start in court, not you, but someone would start in court. Presumably the holder of the easement would want a determination from the court about the scope and purpose, extent of the easement. And so that would typically be initiated by the holder of the easement. The other way it happens, of course, is if someone decides they don't like the easement and they seek to block it, that can also be the way that a declaratory judgment would start by the person saying, well, no, you can't use this, and so you must stop. But once a lawsuit starts, there can be then additional claims going in different directions. And sometimes it's possible just to stop the music and everybody goes home. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes if there are claims asserted by the other side, for example, that the other side wants to pursue, the case can go on, even though the party initiated the case might not want to continue with it.
So one of the options that was suggested was that if down the road public access were denied, that we would request that our Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust defend us. What would that look like legally in terms of, well, if public access were denied, what does that look like as a legal strategy to try to fight that?
Well, and I don't think it would be the trust defending the board. I don't think the board gets brought into the litigation. I think the idea would be if a gate goes up and on the orange section in Eustis, saying the public is not allowed to use this road. I guess the request would be that the trust potentially bring an action to challenge the gating of the road on the basis that their access easement is such that the public is allowed to use the road by virtue of their permission that they give the public to use that access road. So they would be defending the easement that they are saying they have against a challenge that the easement is more narrow than the easement they say they have.
And are you suggesting there would be no role for the state? I'm not thinking the LMF board, but there would be no role for the AG's office to be a party to that?
I'm not sure I would want to go that far because there in this project, there would be a project agreement that would be recorded that would make clear that there's some public involvement here. So I think the state would have a basis to say that we need to be heard on this too, because of the public funding piece. And so therefore, at least we have standing to make that kind of argument. But the real the crux of the dispute would be about the nature of the easement, and that typically is between the person who owns the land the easement crosses and the person who holds the easement. In this situation, it's important to stress there's not a public easement. The public itself does not have a right to cross the road. And the argument is that by virtue of the easements that were granted in the early 60s, the trust can give permission to the public to use the road to access the trust property for recreational purposes. So it does get complicated, but I think it's important to make that distinction. If there is a question about the public's own right directly to use the road, that's a different sort of creature than the one that we're dealing with right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Jim?
Yeah, I'm shocked that not necessarily we, but other state agencies regarding state parks, wildlife management areas, and et cetera, have not encountered this particular situation over time. It seems amazing, and it seems to be support the conclusion you might come to that that all of that activity never generated, any serious legal actions or serious gatings. I think it's our job to try to get to yes any way we can, especially being supportive here. And, in light of that, I'd like to ask Mr. Spencer to briefly, I know you've got an exhaustive thing here, but to provide us with, I saw your final conclusion, but maybe giving some of us a little more comfort that it's worth us potentially taking a risk, whether it's this or this.
Can I speak from here or should I come up to the table? Or?
You can stand up and speak from there. Make sure that Mac and Catherine, can you see Mr. Spencer on your cameras? Yeah, okay.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dick Spencer. And as I said before, years ago, I co-founded Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust. And frankly, this project has come together, I think, as a once in forever opportunity to protect the Kennebago watershed. I can go into the details as to why it has come together and why it's taken basically 20 years for us to get to this point. The access over the Tim Pond Road, our agreement with Beirut provides guaranteed written down public access, explicit, no question, under specific terms over the green portion of the Tim Pond Road. And the Tim Pond Road basically runs for 20 miles from Eustis, where it hits Route 27. And it's basically it's almost like a logging superhighway. It's a great big road. It's a 70-foot right of way. And it's a big major hauling road. The issue is the roughly 4 miles of the Tim Pond Road that's in the town of Eustis. And in the 1960s, Brown Paper Company, which owned basically all the townships to the west of Eustis, including Town, and then further west, built the what was called the Brown Company Road, from all the way from Aziscahas all the way up to Eustis as a major way of getting timber out of that whole western Maine region. At the time that they built this road, the Tim Pond Road or the Brown Company Road, they got deeded access from 2 property owners over the yellow portion. And at the time, about 2.5 miles of that was owned by Scott Paper, and about 1.5 miles in 2 segments was owned by a guy named Harlan C. Sylvester. Both of those property owners got a huge benefit from having Brown Company build that road, because for Scott, it meant that they could use that as a hauling road, whereas before what was known as the Tim Pond Road was a much smaller track. And then Harlan Sylvester, who owned property on both sides of this Brown Company Road, was able to subdivide all of his property and sell off lots, which he did in 2 segments. So he sold off all the adjoining land along his 1.5 miles to 2 miles to people who have houses on his segments of the Tim Pond Road. So that portion of the road now provides access not only to the Scott Paper lands, which are now owned by Weyerhaeuser. If you go through the title work, it goes through about 10 different changes from 1960 when it was Scott Paper until it went through Plum Creek, and then now it's to Weyerhaeuser. But also there are all those homeowners along the road who use the road to get access out to Eustis. And then it also provides access to all of the Beirut lands that are along the green line. And it's not shown here, but lands that go another 20 miles to the west. The deeds that the Brown Company got granted general rights of way over the road it was building. And that's all they said. They said, you know, we grant a right of way to Brown Paper Company over this road. So it didn't say we grant a right to Brown Paper Company and the public over the road. It just said Brown Paper Company for access to its lands to the west. And it granted that right to Brown Paper Company and Brown Company's successors and assigns. Beirut is the successor and assign of Brown Company because they bought what used to be the Brown Company lands. And Rangy Lakes Heritage Trust in the two blue segments will be the successor to Beirut and therefore the successor to Brown Company. If we're able to purchase those two blue areas. So we will have the same deeded rights that Brown Company had when they built the road and got those rights of way. Now, at the time that they did that, Brown Company allowed the public access over that road to its lands to the west, with the exception actually of the gated road that goes up to Kennebago Lake. So all of this land has been open to the public for, basically forever. I actually, there was an old road that back in the 1890s that went into Tim Pond. And, it was basically it was a buckboard road. And I've read some descriptions of the road, and apparently it was sort of like a shake and bake cruise. It was pretty rugged, but anyway, Brown Company made it into a good road. And since 1960, it's been open to the public without any question. Harrison Sylvester sold off all of his land on both sides of the road and then died. So his heirs or successors don't own any land now, although they have an arguable claim to the bottom of the road subject to the right of way. So it seems very remote that they would think that they could put up a gate to prevent Scott Paper and Beirut and Ranger Lakes Heritage Trust and everybody to the west from using that road. I mean, that seems entirely far-fetched. We don't think there's a significant risk here. We think we do have deeded access. The point that Nat made is very important to understand. There is not what you think of as guaranteed public access over the yellow portion of the road. What we think there is, I mean, what we say there is, and we think there is the right in the successors of the Brown Company to invite members of the public to use that yellow portion of the road for access to the Kennebago project lands. So what we would suggest is that the project agreement be very specific that, that Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust agrees that members of the public are invited to use the project lands for public recreation, including snowmobiling, on the existing roads and trails and those, and that the Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust provides access to members of the public wishing to use the project lands. That's what we think exists as a legal right. It's a little different from general public access because it's essentially derived public access through Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust. We're confident enough in our position that we would be willing to Jason made that suggestion in his memo, and that we think that absolutely should be in the project agreement. So be ready to say that Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust will take whatever action is necessary to protect public access, protect access by members of the public wishing to use the project lands over the stretch of the road in Eustis. The only thing we would ask is that if we put that in the project agreement, that we add a sentence that says that the department would cooperate with Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust in that effort. And we think that the fact that the state would have an interest here, I mean, in the remote situation where this ever became an issue, if somebody were looking at the idea of trying to put up a gate there, the fact that the state had an interest as well as Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust would be a huge deterrent to anybody even thinking about doing that. So basically that's the story. I mean, we think this, well, I guess there's one other thing I should say. I said this is a once in a millennial opportunity to protect this whole area of the Kennebago. It's been a very long and arduous process to get to this point and to get an agreement with Beirut to sell all of this land to Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust. We've had to go through essentially two whole contract agreements because the initial agreement had it had set the price based on an appraisal, but it had to fall within certain limits. Based on the stumpage cruise of the property that was done later. When the stumpage cruise was done, it came out with more stumpage that put it outside the limits of the agreement that we had. So the whole project was out of agreement again. That stumpage level value, what turned out to be higher than the appraisal value that came back. And we've gotten Beirut to agree to the appraisal value, even though it's lower than what they felt the stumpage value was. If this project doesn't get the support of LMF, the chances are that we'll have to go back to Beirut, try to get them to agree again to do something different. Probably have to have new appraisals. The chances, I would say the chances that we would end up doing this project probably would be less than 50-50. And that's where we are. I mean, this is.
Thanks, Dick. I've got several board members with hands up. I'm gonna go with Catherine, Amanda, and then to Bob. So Catherine.
Thank you. I'm first in support of this because I think that we can make it work. And I think, Laura had said, and we'll probably be seeing more projects like this. I also think that we want to be careful because this can set a precedent for how we go forward with projects. And to me, the public access is critical, and the public has access to this property, but it's not guaranteed, and that's the problem. But I think those three mitigations, and I would like to see that all three of those mitigations get in there, that provides me a level of comfort that we can proceed with those if we have all three of those. And I wasn't sure if Rangeley Lakes had said that they were comfortable with all three.
Catherine, I'm gonna jump in because we're here, only getting like every third word.
Like maybe, and you should
No.
turn her camera off.
Yeah, if you could turn your camera off to see if that helps with the bandwidth here a little bit.
Okay. Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Keep talking.
Keep talking.
Okay. Okay. So my first point was that I'm in favor of this project, and just interrupt me if you can't hear me. Because I think that number one, the project's important, and I see other projects coming along like this. You know, I anticipate those where there could be some public access, but also that we're going to be setting a precedent for projects going forward. And I think it's critical that since we're spending public money, that public access is in there. And the public access is there, but it's just not guaranteed. But I think that the three mitigations that were listed there, and ultimately the last one, which would say that Rangeley Lake Heritage Trust would reimburse if, you know, they couldn't establish public access if it was ever denied. All three of those are important. And I'm wondering does Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust, have they seen all three of those mitigations? They've addressed the first two, but I would be comfortable proceeding with this if we can have all three of those mitigations added in. Could you hear me better at that point?
Yeah, I think we got most of that, Catherine. So it's, she,
Can you recap her?
yeah, so there were, if you go to the motion, there are 3 points that staff brought up with the draft motion.
Well,
It's actually not in the motion, it's,
Yeah.
yeah, but it would be added.
Right, yes, right here. So, Catherine, I believe these are the points that you're referencing in your comments. Require the trust to defend public rights of access on Tim Pond, add language to the project agreement establishing members of the public are invitees of Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust. And then third, which is the one that I was going to raise to the trust, is require repayment of LMF funds if public access is lost. So it basically, you've exhausted every opportunity to defend access. Then and at the very end, the trust is required to refund if that was the case. So those are the points I think that Catherine is making.
Can I respond to?
Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I think the first, as I said, I think the first 2 points are completely appropriate, and we would be able to agree with them. You know, although I co-founded Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust, I'm not on the board. I'm its attorney. And I would advise the board, if LMF put in the requirement that Rangeley Lakes Heritage.
Which board, Dick? This board or the trust board?
You
just said the board.
The trust board. I would have to advise the trust board to kill the project rather than agree to that. I mean, Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust, you know, depends on $100 contributions from its 1,500 members to keep the lights on and the doors open. It's a nonprofit land trust, which in this project altogether will be raising and putting $11 million into this project. If they've spent the $2 million on the land, how can they, I think they would probably lose their land trust certification if they agreed to a condition that might require them to come up with $2 million, probably would have the potential to destroy the trust as an entity. I mean, I would just tell them, don't agree to that. I just have to say, you know, we can't do this. You can't borrow, you can't have an unfunded liability on your balance sheet of $2 million when you're a land trust. Just,
Thanks, Dick. I want to come back to the board. Amanda, Bob, and then Bethany.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to something that Jim said a little while ago about, parks and public lands, and we certainly do have, access issues that we have to work through. And we have parcels that the access that we have, as it stands right now is not guaranteed. But I think when it is a parcel that is worth the risk, it's something that we work through. So I would just say that I'm comfortable with the two, the first two options here.
Yeah, I'm really kind of conflicted about this, and I was inclined, I think initially to say that option 3 was maybe the way to go, but my concern is the stretch of road is not the only land that this landowner holds in the state. And, if someone decides to take affirmative action now to clear up this access, I'm afraid it would turn into a case of poking the bear. And, who knows what the ramifications of that would be for the rest of the state. I think I could support options 1 and 2 and just make an incumbent on the Heritage Trust to basically guarantee to take an affirmative defense if there were some issues on access.
Well, Bethany.
Yeah, just to add to what you both said about access and how the state deals with access. We certainly face the issue all the time with IF&W. We've actually faced it recently on 2 LMF projects, the Caribou Stream one and the Deadwater. Fortunately, we were able to work through those by buying a right of way and negotiating with a holder of the right of way on another parcel. But we very well could have ended up in a situation where we couldn't make progress with those 2 landowners and be in a similar situation than this. So, in this part of the state where it's commercial forest land, private lands, where those initial rights of way were put in place with the perspective of commercial forestry and not necessarily public access and recreational values, it's certainly out there and certainly something that we're going to face more and more. And probably BPL faces more and more just because of the nature of where they're acquiring most of their land. From a designated state agency on this project's perspective, we feel like the natural resource values here are fantastic. Public recreational values here are fantastic. And this project is a real gem in the state of Maine. We always want to be achieving that public access for all purposes of a public way language out there. And so we want the trust to exhaust those options for achieving that. And it sounds like they have done their due diligence to do that. And after that, for us, it becomes a question, not just in LMF projects, but all projects that we acquire ourselves or serve as a, pass-through entity and hold the notice of grant agreement on. We look to sort of do that risk assessment of, what's the value of doing this project and what's the risk of the public access being, not solid. And in talking with Judy, she feels very comfortable with putting forward these 3 items to address the risk and make sure that the public funds maintain their integrity and the public recreational values are maintained. Those 3 is what Judy and I have discussed, 3 up here. As for the number 3 on here, I would just ask a question to LMF staff as to the terms of the project agreement and what those terms are for if a parcel was they were to lose control of the parcel. So separate from the public access piece, but the ownership, like what is the responsibility of the trust to pay back or make LMF whole in that particular case? And I think some of those terms are already there. And this would just be the public access component of it. So
Yeah, every project agreement has the terms that if the property is essentially converted to a non-conservation use, then the LMF be reimbursed. You know, the like context we've ever encountered that in practice has been when a portion of a property was taken for a road or utility easement. But that language is in there. It applies to the property. I don't think we have a precedent of something that's specific to public access. We do have a precedent on a couple of projects where there were federal funders that were going to require reimbursement of 100% of the land value, that we put in language that specifically said, even if you give 100% of the land value to your federal funder, you still have to reimburse LMF, so that the land trust was functionally on the hook for more than the value of the land. But I guess that's what we've done in the past with project agreements.
And this sort of number 3 language in terms of repayment is something that the department has put into notice of grant agreement with federal funding. In a few cases where there were some, questions out there. So.
Can I speak to that?
Go and keep it at the board for right now, Dick. Barbara.
I do have a question for Dick, if that's
Tricky.
okay.
Now, I just,
Okay.
yeah, let's just make, are there any other issues? We'll quickly go back to Dick if there's no other comments. Roger, did you have one?
The general one, I don't know if it's contributes to anything, but since day one, my board term, and by the way, I have to thank Dick, I believe, who argued Angus King to get me onto this board in 1999. So thank you, Dick.
You have to recuse yourself.
But public access is like those two words have just been with me from day one. And I guess I worry this is not at all sophisticated about a slippery slope situation here. And not here, when do we put the hammer down on public access? So it's just a personal thoughts. Appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, I agree with Amanda in terms of I'm willing to take the risk of 1 and 2. I think the project obviously is overwhelming. It received all the support, and I look at history as an example that we've never been confronted with this situation, and there are good reasons for that, multiple reasons, some that we're well aware of, some that we're not. So I think it's a risk. I hope I'm not being reckless in it. I don't think so, but a risk that I'm certainly willing to take on behalf of the people of the state of Maine.
Barbara.
I'm still trying to determine the risk that I am taking on behalf of the people of Maine. And so that's a question that I wanted to direct to Attorney Spencer. So we've talked about these 2 potential mitigations of the risk, and we've talked about a gate going up on the road and denying public access. Could you just explain to us who would be able to put up a gate? Are we talking about one entity, multiple entities? You've talked about a lot of people who own property on that 4-mile stretch. Who is this entity that we refer to that could put up a
Well,
gate?
That 4-mile stretch was owned by 2 owners in 1960 when the Brown Company got its easements over the road. And one of them was at the time Scott Paper Company, and the other one was Harlan Sylvester. Scott Paper Company is now Weyerhaeuser Company, which I've forgotten the number, but they own something like 20 million, 35 million acres of timberland all over US and Canada. And Maine is something like a hair on their toenail. The other person who owned a mile and a half was this Harlan C. Sylvester, who died in the early 80s after having sold off all the land on both sides of the road. So if we're talking about theoretical possibilities, the heirs of Harlan Sylvester could come forward and say, we own this strip of land under the right of way, and we're going to put up a toll gate. I think that's a very far-fetched notion, and the idea that they would have a strong legal claim is very far-fetched because they don't have any adjoining lands that they own that would be benefited or damaged by the access. So I think they would have. I mean, I think it's just it's a law school. This is like a law school exam where you try to come up with every possible reason why the public can't go over the road they've been going over for the last 100 years. Well, not 100 on the Brown Company, but going back to Carrie Stevens, she rode the buckboard from Eustis to Tim Pond, and described it in an article that was published in New York City, telling people that trout fishing was fabulous, but you better be ready for the road. So it's been open, this way for more than 100 years. For Brown Company Road, it's been open now for 63 years. There's nobody besides Weyerhaeuser or the successors of Harlan C. Sylvester, now deceased, who could ever even theoretically put up a gate.
And does Weyerhaeuser have previous experience putting up gates anywhere in Maine or their properties, or do you know? I mean, is this something they suddenly?
From what all I can tell you is I called Luke Muzzy, who I've known for years because he was the representative for Plum Creek, and he basically said, I mean, in so many words, he just said, don't go there. That I can't even get the attention of our legal department, and I'm retiring in a month. But he also didn't even suggest that. He did tell me one useful fact was that Weyerhaeuser doesn't have a deeded right of way over Harlan Sylvester. So he didn't think they were going to want to raise the issue.
So are you saying that the Harlan Sylvester heirs still hold
I
the
think
right
they
on
have.
that road?
I think they have title to the underneath the right of, these right of ways that were granted by their ancestor. And I'm not sure who that involves. I tried to do an internet search, and there's one son, I think, who used to live on Fletcher Street in Kennebunk, but he sold the house. And I think he might live in Lyman. And Harlan Sylvester's widow might still be alive at age 94 and live in Winthrop. Maybe there's a board member here. Go and sue her. But I think these are theoretical things. I mean, from a practical point of view, if the public can't get in there, I can't either, because I use that road. That's my legal access. So I think this is a theoretical issue. As I said, we would be, I could not advise the board. There's a term called a black swan event where the chances that it ever happens are almost infinitesimally small, but if it did, the world would come to an end. I think for Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust, having to give back $2 million after you've already spent it on the land, you know, at some future date, would be a black swan event that I just couldn't advise them to sign on to. I'd have to just tell them to, basically, I think I'd have to tell them that unless they can find other money very quickly to kill that 5,000 acre piece of this project.
Dick, you had mentioned that if there was going to be an agreement, minus the third point, which you articulated would be bad, the black swan event, you would want to see additional language that the department would be engaged in any legal action or?
Well, I wanted something that would say that they would cooperate, and I haven't put a definition on that, but if somebody in the highly unlikely event that somebody thought, okay, I'm gonna go out there and put this gate here and say you can't come through, I would like Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust to have the department as an ally in defending this. And I would like some language that said something like, you know, in the event of a challenge to public access, the department would cooperate with Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust in defending the right of members of the public to access the project lands over the segment of the Tim Pond Road in Eustis.
So just back to the board here, and Catherine, I see your hand up. I'll come to you in a second. If in fact the language was going to reference, I think, the department or the state in any way, we need to bring the AG and review that language. So I would be uncomfortable personally making a decision today about that without having that conversation with the AG's office to review that language, making sure that they are comfortable with that type of approach. Because if we're going to tie the agency back to that, is it on this point, Jason?
Yes, I was going to say, if the board were to approve it with that understanding, staff could run that down with the AG's office without having to come back to the board.
I'm personally not willing to even approve it. I'd rather have the conversation and come back with actual advice and language for our consideration. Again, my personal feelings, I mean, this is a great project. I have no, the input from Bethany, from IFW, from the value of this project weighs heavily on my thinking here, but required public access is something that I think, like Roger, this whole program is revolving around public access. So that's literally the only hang up I'm having. So I'd like to get some additional input from the AAG's office to make sure we're going in the correct direction. Is it to this point?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think in terms of the timing of all of this, I mean, my expectation is that in the black swan event that somebody challenged this, I mean, I think the chances are 90% that the department would want to cooperate with us.
Yeah, I don't think.
So I think we'd be willing to go ahead without that sentence.
Yeah.
If the board were willing to go ahead without it.
I still, even without that sentence and with that agreement, I would want some additional legal advice, I think, from knowing, being the one who's going to be signing off on this document at some point in the future. But Catherine, I'm going to go to you and then to Bethany, and then we need to wrap this up.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me. Yes, that was going to be my point as well, is that I'd be more comfortable with the AG's office weighing in on this. And again, I'm going to be a stickler on the public rights of access that I feel like that financially, if there are any legal bills, and that should be on Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust as well. And I do feel that we're setting a precedent, and I think that point number 3, the required repayment of LMF funds. I mean, I realize that the chances of it happening are very small.
Thank you, Catherine. I think we got most of that, but which the nutshell, in a nutshell, you'd be more comfortable having the our AAG review this. I think she's frozen now. Bethany, did you?
Yeah, no, just in reference to the language about the department, I think it's important for us to clarify which department we're talking about. Is it IF&W as the designated state agency? Is it ACF, you know?
Yeah.
And so I would want IF&W to be able to participate in that conversation, because we need to understand for our department what that means for us above and beyond the terms of the project agreement.
Yeah, okay.
But of course, we would participate, you know, as partners in the project, but we just need to understand exactly what that means.
I just really want to agree with you, and like.
Write that down.
But I think we've had a very thorough discussion of the risk, and I think the public has every right to expect us to really drill down on the level of risk that we're taking. I'm much more comfortable that that risk is something that I could accept on behalf of the public. But I think it is very important not to commit the state or any department or any entity without legal advice moving forward.
Thank you. Can you answer me a timing question here? I mean, I don't want to get into prolonged legal conversations with our AAGs and have that be the thing that drags this project down. Can you give us a sense of where you are from a timing standpoint from the trust?
Yeah, I was gonna ask or suggest that if there's any way you could, I don't know how often you meet, but if there's any way that you could, if you, do you meet in
September's.
Next week is in August? September, early September.
28.
That may kill the project.
We have the ability, if we have good legal advice, to deal with this through a phone or and pull together a quick board meeting and do it by webinar. I think this would take a lot of time if the advice is correct, and that we make sure that we understand our risk, our legal. Obviously, the risk is relevant to the fiduciary responsibility that we have. And so I want to make sure that we're dotting the i's, crossing the t's with that advice. And I would be more than willing, if the board agrees, to pull together a webinar in a short time frame to deal with just this one issue. I don't want to leave the trust hanging.
And
Okay.
could we just ask, what is the date that your option expires or that you've agreed to close?
Right now, the last date for doing the project.
So our contract will expire something like December 16th. If we need to extend that long, we're hoping to close before then because we've been lining things up. But that is when the contract expires. Another issue here is funding, and we are likely to take out a bridge loan in order to get to an earlier closing. That's what we'd like to do for a number of reasons. And without some sense of where the LMF is going to go, LMF board's going to go on this decision, you know, my board may or may not approve, probably won't approve a bridge loan until we know that.
I would advise them not to.
Right.
And then the other question is whether the appraisal will have to be redone. And if the appraisal has to be redone, then we're in a whole other time world, because the appraisers are also busy and you can't get them to do anything for, 6 months.
August 15th. We can have you an answer by August 15th.
Yeah, that would be excellent.
I think that would work.
Yeah.
What's the board comfort with that? We can have staff engage with the AAG, try to get an answer as quick as we possibly can, and then convene a quick webinar board meeting by the 15th.
Responsible.
I feel like at least I feel I would have all of the information in hand to be more comfortable making a decision, especially if it's not going to be from the third floor.
Yeah, I just want to clarify this. When I mentioned that I'm prepared for the risk, I'm also was prepared that there would be some sort of legal review on our part, so it was not a reckless.
No, I agree. I understood that. I understood that. Ed, you've been patient in the back. This has been a board discussion for a reason, but you have a very, very quick comment.
Well, I can make a suggestion. Having been the director of public lands and the commissioner, the board has been funding acquisition projects in the Northwoods since 1988. And as the commissioner said, Commissioner Beal, public lands and the department, of course, IFW as well, face this issue on a regular basis. But the suggestion that I would make is that I don't know about this project in detail, but Hope Hilton or Jeff Padot, who retired from the AG's office, are still around. They probably do remember the times we got into this jam on Moosehead Lake, on number 5 bog, as Jason mentioned, and a number of others in the woods. And they could probably remember, I'm pretty sure Hope would, remember specifics about exactly how we got ourselves out of the box. I mean, I think and ultimately here, I think you framed it correctly, that the natural resource values here are one of the things. The public access is another one, but we do have the Great Ponds law, we have the colonial ordinance, and we have other tools that the state of Maine, not just the department, but the state of Maine can bring to bear. So, Chairman, I'll end with that, but thank you. And I'd be happy to assist in helping foster some other remembrances.
Thanks. Thank you, Ed.
Dick mentioned maybe getting another appraisal. I assume that's not a requirement that we're getting on the applicant.
So where we are on appraisals right now is the one parcel appraisal has been accepted on the, what we're calling the Kennebago Headwaters project. That's the $1 million award. We have not received an appraisal for review on the Kennebago Woodlands project. That's still a preliminary allocation. I don't know if you're talking about an appraisal that you've done and not submitted to us yet.
Yes.
Okay.
And what I was talking about was dealing with Dan Hudnut on, we've already had to go through about 3 or 4 iterations of this. And the only way we got through it was that Erin Tilburg told me to imitate her in dealing with Dan. So.
And to finish my thought on that, my recollection of the appraisal of the first parcel was it didn't assume public access. And I don't see why the outcome of that discussion would, need a new appraisal.
All right, I think staff has enough to go back.
I do want to clarify what questions the board wants input from the AG's office on, to make sure we are getting exactly the answers that you all want.
Yeah.
I've heard 2 questions. One, I think, is just general advice on the extent of the board's discretion to award funds when there is not a clear right of public access. And 2 would be the ability to language in a project agreement that commits a future department in some way. Were there any other specific questions?
I think, I mean, think you're gonna have to give the AG the file, right? I mean, let them review Mr. Spencer's memo to us, any additional information from the project attorney. And then those particular questions, I think, are pertinent, in particular, the three that are here. We understand that the trust, I'm gonna go out on a little skinny limb, is in opposition to the third bullet. And because of the unlikelihood of an issue in the future, those are major roads, that are giving access to a lot of people, leaseholders and others, access to that area. So I'm thinking this is that black swan issue, but I just want to make sure that that the AG's office, who will have to defend a department, is comfortable with the approach that we're going to be taking.
All right. So you're saying, so in addition to the two questions, you'd like the AG's office to weigh in on the merits of Dick's argument and the status of legal access, and also which of those mitigations they would recommend or really they would really need to be doing.
Right.
Okay, got it.
By the 15th of August.
That depends entirely on the status of CMP litigation.
We've had several conversations this week with the head of the natural resource agency group. I know exactly what his eyes are going to do. And you can say that came from me. Okay, this was a good discussion. These issues are not easy ones. They never are. Welcome to the board.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, let's finish up with the other portions of the agenda. We have legislative updates from Steve. Are you doing these, Laura?
I think Laura is gonna handle.
Sorry, and the slides are reversed again. Apologies. Laura's got some staff updates come first, and head of legislative updates.
Okay,
I can go ahead and-
that's fine.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to provide a few quick updates on work that LMF staff are doing to address some of the recommendations and action items in the Maine Climate Council's 4-year climate action plan, Maine Won't Wait, which Laura already talked about, and also some of the work we're doing to address recommendations made by the Climate Council's Equity Subcommittee. So first, just quickly looking backwards at some of the work that the LMF board has already done to address these recommendations. In round 10 and round 11, you added points for climate resiliency and underrepresented geophysical settings to address the action item to revise scoring criteria for state conservation funding to incorporate these climate considerations. So work that you've already done, and now turning to turning to work that LMF staff are working on now. We are working with the Open Space Institute, Maine Natural Areas Program, BPL and IF&W staff to continue to explore. This is obviously an ongoing conversation that the board has already been involved in, but to explore how carbon storage and sequestration could be incorporated into LMF project selection and management. And so that not only touches on the action goals, but also it touches on the action item to develop new incentives to increase carbon storage. And so some of the specific things that we're working on, I'll start reading the slide while it slowly adjusts here. We've got a few things that we're working on now. First of all, the Open Space Institute and Maine Natural Areas Program. Oh, it's really slow. It's really not. Wow. That's okay. Okay. Are exploring how to incorporate high resolution forest carbon data into MNAP pre-acquisition report. So this is pretty exciting work, and LMF is sort of a fly on the wall of this data-driven conversation. So working to see how we could have that information available when we are reviewing LMF applications. And furthermore, LMF, OSI, and MNAP are working to develop options to include these data in proposal scoring. So I think a few important things to note here is that MNAP and OSI are really trying to make this big data set, analyze this big data set in a way that works for Maine. So it's pretty exciting, and to help us think about ways to identify high forest carbon projects. Wow, it is still changed on my screen and not changed here.
I know. Is it,
Anyway,
is
so
it
that's
worth
okay.
trying it again? Can you?
Maybe. Okay, and a few other things that I wanted to mention here. or that LMF, BPL, and IFNW staff have met once so far and hope to have ongoing conversations, plan to have ongoing conversations to discuss a voluntary carbon management commitment. All right, for LMF projects. And this conversation really was centered around the feedback that the LMF board provided in the November of last year board meeting, where a proposal was presented to the board, ultimately not adopted, but a lot of great feedback came from that proposal from both the board and DSAs. So I think the conversations we've had, or the conversation we've had has been positive, and I think I feel like we were all on the same page on a potential way that we could move forward. We haven't really dug into specifics yet, but more just the framework of how that proposal could be revised. And so our plan is to draft a proposal for the LMF board to consider later this fall, incorporating these bullet points and also potentially incorporating points, thinking about a way to acknowledge marsh migration projects, which seem like a gap in our climate scoring right now for LMF projects. So I will say that Jennifer Melville, who's been working on this project from the jump, all of my staff have been working on this at one point or another, but Jennifer's here to add anything that I've inadvertently left out. But one question that staff have for the board at this point is if there is any interest in, if there's any interest from the board in a small group, maybe a subcommittee, providing feedback and helping us finalize that draft proposal that could come to you this fall. So I'll pause there before moving on to the next.
Any thoughts from the board on it?
I would be happy to participate in that.
Matt, go, so can you say that again? We've got very bad bandwidth here today.
I'm just volunteering to be a board member on any small group discussing these issues.
Thank you for that.
Or I'll participate as a staff person, DSA staff person. Perfect.
Okay, and if anyone, decides later on that they want to join in on the fun, you can let us know.
Yeah.
So moving on to the next staff update, or sorry, wow, that was quick. Actually, I should say, if Jennifer wants to add anything, since you've been working on this for the longest, I do want to leave space.
The only thing I would add is I just think it's really important to recognize how far along Maine is on this. Maine, we OSI, I'm no longer an employee, but I'm a consultant to them and other groups, are working, nationally on the data and then regionally with other states. And this is one of the first states where we're trying to take the data and really finalize it, make it work for Maine specifically. And this is carbon data, looking at how much carbon is in the forest now and what would there be in the future, given the management. So I think it's just really exciting that Maine is so much at the forefront here, and LMF in particular is really revising its criteria. And it is a little complicated, which is why when we talked about it last November, we were doing well with the resilience data, but we sort of threw something at you on the carbon data and you gave great feedback. And this is giving everybody time to work with the state agencies, work with LMF, work with the Forest Service on this. So it's really pretty exciting. And I think you should be commended for looking at this and using Maine Won't Wait to drive this forward. So that's all I wanted to say. Thanks. And the staff is great.
On that note, the other update staff wanted to provide with respect to the Climate Council's Equity Subcommittee, we wanted to talk about a little bit of the ongoing work that is happening to address some of that Equity Subcommittee's recommendations. Just starting with a look backwards at some of the work the LMF board has already done to address these considerations, or the recommendation was to incorporate equity considerations into grant scoring. And of course, you did that last round with the incorporation of points for projects located in areas where outdoor recreation is limited and projects that demonstrate the inclusion of low income or otherwise disadvantaged communities. So some great work already done there. And some of the work that staff has done since then really is centered around the work of our intern, AJ Courtney, who is joining us remotely today. AJ just graduated from USM School of Policy Planning and Management, and their internship is over at this point. So presenting on their work is a donation of their time, and really AJ's work focused on
examining equitable access to green space and natural resources in Maine. And I think that LMF, we're excited to use their research as a jumping off point moving forward. So that's really the update. I'll stop sharing and let AJ jump in. I see AJ now, and AJ is going to share their own slides.
She's on mute.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
AJ, can you turn off your, she might have to, can you turn off your video? Unfortunately, we can't really hear you.
Yeah, definitely. All right, now can you hear me a little better now?
If I turn up my.
Yeah, try that, yeah.
People will still see this shared
Okay.
slide.
All right, let's try.
AJ, unfortunately, you're frozen.
Oh, okay, that's not good.
And if you can, are you trying to share your presentation now?
I haven't shared it yet. I just want to get a confirmation that you can hear me all right.
It's us. Another option, we do have a recorded presentation that AJ did last week for state staff. AJ, I would hate to offer this, but it is, we could share that link with the board if you're interested.
I think based on the timing here of the meeting, why don't you share that with the members of the board?
Yeah. I'm terribly sorry, AJ.
That's that's okay. If it's not working, it's going to be hard to get through the presentation. So I think sharing the recorded copy that we already have is a good idea.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining today and listening in. Even though your internship is over, we really appreciated having you this past semester.
I really enjoyed working with you. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for letting me be involved with your work and learning a bit about what you do. It was really, really important to me. So thank you.
Thank you, AJ.
I'm gonna put your slides back up. Oh, boy. So. It's not them, it's us.
Okay. And so I can quickly sum up AJ's work by saying they focused on not only, they dug into some reports, conservation planning reports, and also did some spatial analysis focused in Portland. So it's well worth the watch if you have 10 minutes after the meeting.
Definitely. Are you sharing your screen?
Oh, no, but I will.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah. Because I wrote what I need to say on my slide. So, all right.
Okay.
Okay. Now we're on to next one. Okay, now we are in legislative updates.
Let's hear.
Steve, you wanna?
If you want to take it, Laura.
Okay, great. Update on LD 1969. This is the LMF trust fund bill. Much to my surprise, when I checked in on the updates yesterday, I found that it had been signed into law back on June 23rd. Nobody called. I was shocked. This is the big one. This is the one that repeals the existing LMF fund, replaces it with this trust fund that allows us to be interest bearing. It's all it sweeps, and it's going to be a little disorienting around end of year. Like all those accounts that I've had to memorize, go away and turn into something else. All these funds currently in our different accounts get into a single fund. It also provides a separate statutory authority. The way the LMF fund is currently in law, the CNR funding is the backdrop. It was the original, and then everything else was tucked in as separate things. Now each has their own place in the statute, which is nice and tidy. And there's an additional fund, this Conservation Land Management Fund, which is also to be interest bearing, the interest then to be rolled into the LMF trust fund proper. So there are two separate funds. So that's very exciting. Less hopeful note, LD 1285, that was that 20 million that I thought was in the bank. Barbara, you told me don't ever count that. So you know this. And you were probably right. My source is highly skeptical. What to make of that, I don't know. So and also what I noticed in that LD 1285, the thing that shifted, the reason it had been so attractive before is that the money going to be deposited in this fiscal year so as to earn maximum interest. It has been amended so that it doesn't get deposited anyway until next June. So who cares, right? So, but that's not for sure at all. And then the last thing for updates is Wise Hive. I have one solid day. Wise Hive is our online web portal that you've been hearing about. You probably don't believe me anymore exists. I have one solid day of work to get some of the portal things done, and then I'll be sharing it with staff. We'll kick it around and you guys get to kick the tires and see this thing that we've paid for. That's it.
Sure.
I'm pretty sure.
Right. Barbara.
Could we possibly put on our September agenda sort of an update on this trust fund and what our management options are? I know we discussed at one point.
Yeah,
Community
I agree.
Foundation might be an option.
Yeah, I agree. We need just a better understanding, quite likely from the controller's office as well, of what that means that we can do if we're gonna hold it in an interest-bearing account. Does it have to be within the state? Can it be outside?
Oh, yes, all those
So-
good questions.
So we need to answer all those questions. So absolutely, we'll put it on the agenda. I mean, I glanced at it before it was signed into law and had several questions at that time. So, it's good to know that it's been signed. I didn't realize that. Yeah, so, okay. I got enough problems following my own bill. Sure. Okay. Anything else to be brought before the board?
Yeah, earlier mailing, I think said September 26th. I want to triple confirm it's the 28th.
It's 28.
It's the 28th.
It is
Sure.
Positive.
Okay.
I'm distressed that it's 26th anywhere. I wonder, where did I get? it?
28.
Oh, no, it's the 28th. Oh, dear. If people,
Yeah, let's have it at 9 o'clock.
nine? Is it 9 o'clock? Oh, yeah, it's 9 o'clock. Is it 9 o'clock?
Yeah, it's not like a big
Suggesting that it happen at 9.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and that's when we have project selections. Right.
Tell her you're suggesting it happens at 9 o'clock on the 28th.
September 28th.
9 o'clock.
So
It's
that'll
on
be
my schedule at 9 o'clock, so that's when we'll
Excellent.
do it then. That's Moose Week, but I didn't get a permit, so I'll be here. Okay. Thank you very much. Motion to adjourn is in order.
So moved.
Great, thank you very much. Our adjourn.
That'll make it easier.